Welcome, listeners, to Le Grand Bouffe, the Big Feast, with my special guest co-host this week, Mai Masri. Welcome, Mai.
Hi, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So you were born in Amman, Jordan, and then you lived in Beirut.
Mm-hmm.
When did you move to Beirut?
Well, I moved as a child, like I was about 5 years old when my parents moved to Beirut. I was born in Jordan, but my father's Palestinian from Nablus in the West Bank, and my mother is American from Texas.
Oh, wow. That's so. I wondered, do you think that move when you were, how old were you when you were 5?
I was about 5.
Do you think that has something to do with you as a filmmaker being interested in children?
Yeah, I mean, well, it had a big impact on me, I think, living in Beirut, and I still live there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very interesting place and a very vibrant city.
Mm-hmm.
A lot going on culturally and also politically, because it's in the middle of a region that's been through a lot, historical moments. So as a student, I was really exposed to a lot. So I think that had a big effect on me becoming interested in being a filmmaker.
Sure. I don't think Americans typically have really any idea about Beirut. I think Beirut to them sounds like Mars.
Yeah. Well, there are Americans in Beirut.
Right.
There are professors, there are many people.
Sure.
It's an interest, like I was saying, it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot going on, film-wise, music, culture, and it's been through a lot of like historic and difficult moments at the same time. And it's a crossroads, so you have a lot of mixture there.
Uh-huh. Where do you live now?
I live in Beirut.
Oh, you live in well, there you go. So so how much of your time do you spend in Beirut?
Well, I'm based in Beirut, but I travel a lot, especially these days with my new film, 3,000 Nights. I've been traveling to festivals and screening it in different countries around the world.
So this is the first, you've made how many, 7 documentaries?
I've made 9 documentaries.
Okay.
And this is my first feature narrative film.
So what made you decide to move to narrative from documentary?
I think I've always, wanted to experiment different styles and genres. I don't, and my narrative is kind of a continuation of my documentaries. Even the documentaries I made before were kind of structured like narratives. And I wanted to try making a feature narrative. And also the subject itself that I chose is very dramatic, and I felt it had to be done with actors and as a drama.
So you feel like all the documentary work that you did led you to make this film?
For sure, because a lot of the themes I focused on in my documentaries I came back to in my narrative, mainly working a lot with women and children, made a lot of films with children. And also the idea of incarceration has always been a focus in my films.
And why is that?
Why is that? I mean,
what do you find about the prisoner's dilemma to be so important for you to give voice to?
Well, first of all, it's such many people have been around me that I know, and especially in the Palestinian context, have been imprisoned at one time or another. Almost 1 million people,
Wow.
Almost a quarter of the population. And also living in Palestine, because I'm, as I said, Palestinian, although I live in Beirut, but there are lots of Palestinians who are refugees or live outside of Palestine. It kind of there's the situation of Palestinians under occupation. Really, Israeli occupation is the same as being in a prison.
Right.
So it's symbolic for me.
Yeah. And this is based on a true story.
It's based on a true story. 3,000 Nights is based on a story of a woman I met many years ago, who told me her story. Basically, she had been imprisoned in an Israeli prison, and she gave birth to her son inside the prison.
Mm-hmm. And that's the Leal character in this film. And I don't know how to pronounce the actress's name. She's terrific. Who's the actress?
Yeah, her name is Maysa Abdelhadi. She's from Nazareth.
Uh-huh.
This was her first long like role where she really showed her talent. I mean, she's amazing.
How did you find her?
I casted. I did casting. I spent a lot of time looking for actors. The cast is mainly a female cast. So she's very natural.
Yeah, very natural.
Mm-hmm.
And you used an old military prison for your set. It's a very dynamic cinematic. It's a very cinematic place. You can tell that these aren't sets. You're in a real prison.
Yeah, I was so lucky to get that prison. It's an old military prison that's not being used. It's a base, actually, a military base in Jordan. And I was looking, and I had visited many prisons, and most of them being, with prisoners. But this was like a amazing place and empty with no prisoners. And I was able to get a permit.
Yeah, how did you get the permit?
That was really, I think, lucky, because now no one's allowed to shoot in that prison.
Wow.
Yeah, and it really gave a visual, made the film so much stronger.
And how long did you shoot? How long did it take to make the film?
Only 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
But the preparation took a long time.
Yeah, so tell me about the process of writing the story.
The writing took several months and even years, because it's my first script. I'm not really a writer, but I did a lot of research for the script and a lot of interviews with former prisoners, and I read books. I saw other films, of course, but the main inspiration came from the actual real stories. So it's based on a real story, but also all of the characters in the film are based on real characters.
I think that really comes through in the conflict of between the women, and one of the things that I found really interesting and fascinating about the film is that you have these Israeli and Palestinian female prisoners and the conflicts that they have, and obviously that there's a strike that happens. They go on strike, and so there has to be some solidarity between them. And so, can you just talk about the?
Yes, this I found this fascinating. The fact that they actually put Palestinian political prisoners together with Israeli common law prisoners that are there for various reasons together. And I found that when I was doing the research, I heard about this, and I was told that there were many moments even that arose out of this kind of situation, both of conflict, but also moments of solidarity, which I found really remarkable, because we never hear about that. And actually, they in the end, they have so much in common. They're both prisoners.
Of course, and I think that also gets at Americans, I think, really are so removed from this, what's going on in Palestine. And at the end of the film, when you're showing actual people being pulled off the streets and arrested. Can you just talk about how people are just pulled off the street just for nothing and arrested and thrown in prison?
Palestine's under occupation, Israeli military occupation. So the soldiers are everywhere, right?
Right.
And of course, people don't accept to be occupied.
Right.
So there's a lot of arrests that happen against Palestinians, and many children are being arrested. Women, children, men, and this has been going on for many years.
Right.
So at the end of the film, I used live footage, and some of it I had actually filmed myself.
Oh, wow.
Because I've been filming for many years, since the 80s.
So it sounds like you're just living in constant fear when you go out of your house.
Well, there is, of course, the pressure of being under occupation, but I think it's not just fear; it's also, unacceptable more than fear. That people don't really accept to be living under those conditions.
Right. Well, I think that's another thing that certainly politicians and governments never seem to realize, is that any people, doesn't matter, we're all the same. We're all made of the same stuff. And people always react the same. When you try and occupy them, they fight back, and they have a lot more skin in the game than the occupiers. It's always a losing game for the occupier, but it seems that history never learns that lesson.
That's true. Even I said it in the film.
Yeah.
It's like one of the phrases of the dialogue between there's an Israeli human rights lawyer that's defending the Palestinian prisoners, and she tells the prison director, "You haven't learned from history." And I think that's an important. It's important to learn from history, exactly like you said. I mean, in the end, justice has to prevail, and I tried to show it through a human story. Whether it could be anywhere. In the end, it's a human story.
Yeah, and it's such a tragic existence for a child. We see the child grow beyond the age of 2. How old is the boy when it's
the
over?
boy is taken away basically when he's 2 years old. He was born, of course, in prison and raised by all of the women prisoners, and I found that really touching because they all become the mothers of this one child who kind of transforms the.
Yeah, I really like the sequences when the women are all taking care of the baby, and you can see that community. It instantly is there. It's just created instantly.
I really wanted to focus on that, kind of how he brings light into their, and even his name is Noor, which means light. And he changes their reality for it becomes, and I wanted to show those magical moments with the child, and also that relationship between the mother and the child, and how she tried to recreate that world for him.
Yeah.
That he doesn't know, he's never seen outside.
Yeah, he's never seen a bird. I like when she does the light show with the bird to teach him what a bird is.
Exactly. So there's a little wooden toy that they make for the child, a bird, and I mean the bird is very meaningful, and then shadows on the wall telling him stories, drawing on the wall, because through that kind of imaginary world, it's like transcending, the thick walls of the prison.
Sure, and I love when you see the drawings on the wall expand into something far greater, and it's exactly what you're saying, where there's a life that wasn't there before, through these artistic images, these artistic representations of life outside the prison.
Life outside, and also the passage of time, because you feel that time is passing. And I tried to use the shadows on the wall, the time lapse, where you see the shadows moving across the wall, to depict also the years and the time that's passing.
So how can people see this movie?
This movie will be online in May.
Oh, great. Do you know what service it'll be streaming on?
It'll be on a platform called Movie Pigs.
Oh, okay, Movie Pigs. All right. And so what is the release date? Do you know?
I think mid-May.
Okay, so that's very soon, right around the Cannes Film Festival.
That's right. And I hope people will see it.
I certainly hope so too. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the beer, and then we're going to talk about The Thick-Walled Room and how we chose that movie. But so the beer that I've chosen for us is called Queens of the Kettle from Fifth Hammer, which is Chris Cusmay's brewery, as I'm sure a lot of people in the New York craft beer world know. And the special thing about this beer is that it is brewed. I'll go ahead and read the tag on it. Brewed on International Women's Day, so I thought it would be especially appropriate, by the women of beer in New York City. Using this year's Pink Boots blend, an exclusive hop blend selected by the Pink Boots Society that includes, oh boy, now I've got to name the hops. Okay, well, it's got Mosaic, Simcoe, Citra, and Laurel hops in it. And just a shout out to the Pink Boots group. They empower women beer professionals to advance their careers in the beer industry by raising money for educational scholarships. So cheers to 3,000 Nights, and to Pink Boots, and to Queens of the Kettle, the name of this sour beer. Well, it's delicious.
It is.
I have to say,
nice
I'm not a fan of sour beers typically, but this one goes down very, very nicely.
It smells very nice too.
Yeah, it's very aromatic.
I like what they stand for. If it's about scholarships and education and women, I think that's a nice change.
Definitely, yeah. We need more of that stuff. I've worked. I was telling a friend of mine that I used to work in a hotel, and that all of the whole department that I worked in was all men, and it really gives a toxic environment. I think anytime you don't have a balance of men and women, it's not good. It's not the way the world works. You need to have both.
That's right.
Which brings us to this movie, The Thick-Walled Room, which is a prison story that is all men, and it shares a few things in common with your story. It's set after World War II, and it's a Japanese prison run by the Americans, and there are Korean and Japanese prisoners of war. They're war criminals, but they're B and C level war criminals, which means that they're rank and file. So the real generals who did all the dirty, gave all the orders, of course, they're off the hook. And so you see this plight, this very human plight that is similar to yours, and the political struggles in the prison. So what did you think about The Thick-Walled Room?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. I hadn't heard about the film before, so it was fascinating to watch it and see the parallels. And also, I read about the filmmaker. I was very interested in his background, Kobayashi. And
Masaki Kobayashi, yeah.
And I discovered that he himself had been a war prisoner. And I thought that really, and that his film is based on the diaries of the prisoners. And to me that that echoes a bit of what I did in 3000 Nights, because it's also based on a true story. And also both of us, he was an actual prisoner himself of war. And I feel, as I said, as Palestinian, all Palestinians feel that they're, imprisoned. So there's a commonality there. And I loved the way he used the shadows, the long shots. I wonder if he shot in a real prison. I don't know.
And
it
looks like it.
It looks like it because they're it looks quite elaborate, although it's an old film.
Mm-hmm. It's from 1956. The movie was made. And so in this film we get a very clear idea of the kind of oppression, political oppression that people are experiencing throughout the country. And any time anyone expresses any social or communist idea, when I say communist, I don't mean it in the pejorative way, obviously. I'm talking about, equality, treating people equally, which is such a fundamental human right, I think, that politicians love to step on.
Yes, he seems very socially aware, the director, and he seems, I guess, from reading about him, that he was the most, his films were the most socially aware films of the time, of the 50s. Very human, and I really like the way he humanizes the prisoners and shows that they're victims of, like you said, that the generals got off the hook, the A level, and it's the ones that were taking the orders and just following orders that paid the price.
And there's still a lot of them, of course, are still carrying their former selves with them, and so you don't. It's very difficult for the prisoners, because still a lot of them, just as in your film, they don't have this freedom of thought, so they're still stuck in the same predicament, the same mental, philosophical predicament that they were when they were prisoners.
Yes.
When they were soldiers. Sorry.
That's true. It does give you an insight also into the mindset. It's a post-war film, but it talks about the kind of the trauma of war and all that baggage, because these were all imperial soldiers. And so was the director himself, which is fascinating. It's rare to find a director who's lived through those experiences and is like recreating it on film. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, it really comes through in the storytelling. What do you think as a filmmaker? What do you think about his compositions that that make the movie work? The way he uses the camera.
Well, I like. I mean, it's black and white, of course. I guess most of but the color was already being used, right, in the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah, but his film is black and white. He works with light and these long. The film he films these the corridors and the shadows. There's not much movement because I don't think they were moving. The camera was not being handheld in the 50s, so
Right.
that's a big difference. And with mine, it's I mean it's all hand. A lot of it is handheld, and I wanted it to have a documentary feel. And I think it's for prison films. It's important to have this raw edge. It wasn't. It was different from a lot of Japanese films I've seen. Kurosawa films, for instance. I found that interesting. It's another style of filmmaking. I think it's one of the earlier films, of course, of the prison genre.
Right.
The thick-walled room.
Are there any? Did you watch any other prison films? But when you were making your movie?
Yes, I did. I watched a lot of prison films. Hunger, which is a really beautiful but very, very tough film to watch.
Yeah, I saw that film at Cannes when it was released, and yeah, it's a very tough film to sit through.
Prophet,
Mm-hmm.
also a French film, which also won the Cannes.
The Palme d'Or.
Palme d'Or in Cannes. Of course, Shawshank Redemption, which I really like.
Mm-hmm.
I can watch it again and again. Escape from Alcatraz.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Escape from Alcatraz? There's two of those, aren't there?
By the way, Escape from Alcatraz has inspired prisoners to run away in many prisons.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. And then there's one about a bird in Alcatraz, the Birdman and the bird.
The Birdman of
that
Alcatraz.
That was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Very, because he raises a bird. He becomes like his whole life is centered around birds, and it changes and makes him, he educates himself. I found that very touching. And also there's an Argentinian film called Leonera. It's also a similar story to mine because she... it's about an Argentinian woman who gives birth to a child inside a prison.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, so there's another one about... Did you take anything from that movie that you included?
No, I didn't.
Or it was just inspiration?
It was inspiration. My inspiration came from the actual interviews I did with the women. But I wanted to watch a lot of films. There's another one I watched after I finished my film called Room. Of course, you've seen. I'm sure. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Because it's also about a woman who's kidnapped and she has her child inside a room and then escapes, or he escapes. It's like it's based on a real story. These are the stories that touch me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched an Iranian film called Women's Prison.
Oh.
I watched a lot.
Yeah, it sounds like you did. Your movie's not an escape film, though. So can you talk about, obviously, I think Americans, especially Western culture, they like to see something like Papillon, where the prisoner is going to make the escape. But your film is more about the actual experience of being stuck in a prison. Can you talk about not going in the direction of anyone trying to escape?
Yeah, I mean, my film is very factual. I didn't want to add fictionalize it, and because the real stories are they're so powerful. There was no need, to kind of try to add anything. So, but the escape that I have in my film is more through the imagination and through the kind of solidarity, escape from the kind of oppression of the prison by going on strike, by the imagination. Also, it's a way, I think, of liberation. It's a very powerful way for prisoners to liberate themselves from that, being behind bars. Their mind is free. So I tried to work on that level. And through the shots also that I had a lot of shots where you don't have words, but you have strong images, like a tight shot, a close-up of her eye, of the mother looking out, where you see the whole prison reflected inside her pupil of her eye. You know, those images I find, to me, they're powerful.
So, you know, you're talking about Palestinians feeling like they're living in a prison, and I think there's a line in this film, in The Thick-Walled Room, where one of the prisoners talks about all of Japan being a prison. And I think that in America, there's also this sense that because of the way our data is being treated, that there's a feeling that countries are now their own prisons. They're becoming prisons, and we see things like all the teachers' strikes. I don't know if you know about all the teacher strikes that are going on across the country right now, where people are, coming together in this solidarity and attempting to have more equality. What do you think about all that?
I think that's very important, and I'm following also the students on strike against the guns, because that's a really dangerous situation. I can't
imagine. I don't have a child, but I can't imagine if I had one. I would be terrified to send my kid to school, and this idea of arming teachers. I don't want to be anywhere near guns. I mean, the one thing that we know about guns is that they go off.
Yeah, it's like shocking for me to think that there guns, or that there's so many gun killings in schools.
It's bizarre, and it doesn't happen anywhere like it does here.
No, it doesn't.
I don't know why. I don't know what this affliction of people taking guns and committing these atrocities at schools. I don't understand the phenomenon at all. I don't know how that, what social conditions create this idea that people would do such a thing.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to speak out for justice, for to try to have a society where everyone is have their rights, and it's important whether we're talking about here or anywhere around the world. This is we need to find a way to find justice and peace for everyone. This is my
so what do you think about we're talking about the children, the kids movement, which is really seems to have some teeth, that is trying to push out these politicians who are paid for by the NRA. What do you what's your perspective on politicians in general and in other countries? Just do you think that the politicians or governments can ever be not influenced by money?
Yeah, I think so. They should be influenced by votes, by people, not by money. Mm-hmm. And I think people can make a difference. And I really believe in these kids. I was so impressed. Some of them are 10, 12 years old,
It's very impressive to see.
Martin Luther's granddaughter spoke out, right? And I was really impressed with what she said. They're really impressive. And
they're very articulate.
They're very articulate, and I think we need more of these voices.
Sure. So what are you going to work on next? I mean, obviously you're still taking your film to film festivals, and hopefully you'll have great experience with the distribution of this movie. What do you want to do next?
Well, I have several ideas. I mean, I'm still very much interested in stories about women who have kind of overcome their, there's a writer I'm thinking about making a film about her, who went through a very difficult time, and she was. This is one idea, but I'd also like to work on themes to do.
Is she Palestinian?
Actually, no. She's from the Middle East.
I see.
She's from the past century, but her story is not known. So I find that this kind of story interesting, because it shows you the kind of journey and struggle of a woman against kind of society, and what the constraints of society against her. And this is kind of a universal story. I'm also interested in questions to do with memory and identity, but through personal stories. What I'm doing now is, because I've made so many documentaries, I feel that I'd like to revisit the experiences I've had while making my documentaries, in fiction, and try to look at all these experiences I've had, but with hindsight, and kind of go deeper and tell the stories of the so many fascinating stories I've heard over the years.
So, do you see yourself collaborating with other people? I know you do something with Columbia University. Can you talk about what that is?
I premiered 3,000 Nights at Columbia University.
Oh, that's where you're premiered. Terrific.
Yeah, and many of the professors there are good friends. I'd love to collaborate with. I'm looking for, in terms of scripts, always looking for good scripts, and I wouldn't mind working with a script writer, because last time with 3,000 Nights it took a long time to write, but I feel it's important to collaborate on creative ideas. In 3,000 Nights I worked with an international crew. It's always very good to have that kind of collaboration.
So, tell me more about your artistic life. You know, how you see yourself as an artist, and your artistic goals.
Well,
because you know, obviously, you know, people think, oh, you know, here's this Palestinian woman filmmaker, and obviously there's a lot more to the story than just that.
Yeah, you know, film is fascinating because it's an art. It's artistic, of course. It's so creative, and it's about people and stories. It's a wonderful medium to be able to, and it's so human, and it's so universal. It's so easy to tell a story, to like reach millions of people and touch them and inspire them.
But you have to finance these things. How did you finance this film?
Very difficult. That's why it took years to make. It's extremely difficult, especially when you're talking about fiction. Fiction, you're talking about millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands. With documentary, it's easier, of course. It's quicker. Financing is difficult, but it's possible in the end if you have good ideas, and it's a struggle.
What do you think about Hollywood's fascination, just obsession with superheroes? It seems that they're not really interested in making cinema anymore. I mean, to me, these films they're just big commercials for merchandising. I look at a film like yours and I think, well, you know, that's a real movie, and then you know, you can go to any cinema in New York City, and it's hard to find a Hollywood feature that, you know, is anywhere near that level of humanity. What do you think about all that?
Thanks, Cole. That's a big. I'm happy you said that, but yeah, I have the same feeling about Hollywood films. That's why I prefer to see independent films and old American films. You know, they used to be much more interesting. But there are some really good films, of course, but they're rare.
They're so few and far between now.
That's right. It's hard to find a good film. That's why the old films seem more interesting.
They really are. I watched this this film called The Nightcomers last night. It's a Marlon Brando film from 1971 that it's a very loose take on the turning of the screw, and it's good. You know, I really enjoyed it much more than I would have if I had gone to see whatever, you know, is playing at the cinema down the street. And of course, this film, The Thick Walled Room, is streaming on Filmstruck, and so, and you know, I find Filmstruck to be, you know, a great place to just experience cinema.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. There are platforms because people always want to see, and people always ask me, where can we see 3,000 Nights? Not all people, you know, because it wasn't released everywhere in theaters, like commercial theaters. So it's good to have places like platforms where you can streamline films, good films. Because like you said, you not necessarily find a good film around the corner. And it seems the good films don't get released. And when they are, they don't last very long in the theater. Because they don't have the funds, I guess the production or distributors don't promote them enough, even though they love good stories.
They do. And there's also this big clash now that's happening between, you can see it at the Cannes Film Festival this year, where Thierry Frémaux is separating films that show on Netflix from Hollywood films, and I think that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with that, because I hope that your movie would be shown on Netflix.
Yeah.
Why not?
I hope so too, because it'll be a way for many people to be able to see it.
And also, a lot of people have home theaters, and it's certainly, with people pulling out cell phones in cinemas all the time, which I just find incredibly offensive. I think that it's very valid. I think that the streaming platforms are incredibly important, especially these days.
That's true. Especially now that the DVD is not really used very widely.
No, the days of DVDs are over. I have to say, if it's less plastic in the world, then
That's true. But in the Middle East, they still watch a lot of DVDs because we can't really streamline in the same way.
Uh-huh.
Some of these platforms aren't, you can't see them everywhere.
Sure. All right, so just give us one more time. What's the platform that 3,000 Nights?
Movie Pigs.
Movie Pigs.
But after that, it'll be available on other platforms. I don't know which ones, but all they need to do, I guess, is to search on the internet. Where is it? 3,000 Nights. There's a Facebook too, so there'll be information on the Facebook.
Very good. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on Le Grand Bouffe, The Big Feast. And for our listeners out there, please remember to turn your cell phones off when you're walking, driving, or riding a bicycle, or watching a movie. And this is Le Grand Bouffe, The Big Feast, a production of Smart New Media.